What is up, everybody? Svenddiesel here with Sportsman's Warehouse. We're going to be tying up a balanced leech. This is one of the more effective patterns I've had over the last couple of years. I really enjoy fishing it on the still water. I've had a little bit of luck in the rivers and streams, but let's go ahead and get started with the materials you need. This is a Daiichi 4647 in a size 10. I typically fish these in 6s to 12s, sometimes 4 if I'm feeling a little bold and thinking I'm going to get a bigger fish. But you also want to use a tungsten bead, and I also step up a size. This is a 5/32. Don't use brass. We need the weight to counterbalance the amount of materials we put on. And you also need a pin. This is an embroidery pin. I think it's a 17 by 1.25 inches. You could also use a nail, anything that has a head that will keep that bead in place. And you'll see what we mean here in a minute when I show you. We're going to use marabou. This is some UV marabou in the color olive. And I really love fishing olive leeches. The marabou comes in a bunch of different colors, so feel free to substitute these for what you feel will be effective in your local waters. But typically I fish olives, browns, blacks, and whites. And for the body, we're going to be using this Arizona semi-seal dubbing in the color olive. It's been a really, really good color for me. It's super effective at catching fish. And with the tail, we're going to put in 2-3 strands of crystal flash. All of these materials you can purchase and sub out and change and create 100 different variations and modifications to this pattern. But let's go ahead and get started in tying this. First step is we got to get our hook in the vise, and we're going to use just a white UTC 210 Denier. You could go a little bit lighter if you want, but I'm going to lay down a little bit of a nice thread base here all the way back to the bend and then work my way up towards the front of the hook at this time and trim out the tag end. Now, the first step is we got to get this thing balanced. And when you talk air versus water balance, I'm going to show you a little trick. So let's go ahead and get the tungsten bead out. And if you got clumsy fingers like me, these are super hard to get on, but luckily these embroidery pins are long. And so I'm going to put it on with the bigger hole facing the head of the pin. And we're going to measure this out, and roughly I want that bead to be even when it's pushed up against the head with the eye of the hook. And I've tested this. Usually when I tie one using a new hook or a new bead size, I always tie one, water balance it, and then see where I'm at and then mimic it. So I know it's going to be there. If you're using these exact materials, you can do it how I'm doing it. I do 4 loose wraps, and then I kind of adjust it to where I want it. You can see that the back end of that bead is even with the hook eye, and that's about where I want it for this. You don't have to have it perfect, but the more we get it to be balanced, the better it will be. And watch this tag end of that embroidery pin. I cut it with some flush cutters, but you can see it's still pretty sharp, and it will cut this thread pretty quick. So the next step is we're going to tie in the tail here, and I'm going to grab a piece of this marabou, and this marabou is just phenomenal. It's got a lot of fluff to it. You can see really, really, really awesome. And I'm going to grab the side of this, and I'm going to pull it off while I'm pinching it. That way the fibers are somewhat almost aligned to how it was on the stem, but I'm not going to be adding the bulk of the stem into my tail. And I'm going to go ahead and transition it into my other hand, give it a little twist to kind of make sure they're all aligned. And I'm going to tie this tail roughly to be 1.5 to maybe 1.25 times the length of the overall fly. And I'll go ahead and secure that right here near the back of the hook with a couple loose wraps, and then I'll really kind of crank down as I progressively work my way up towards that bend with the eye. And I'll go ahead and do a wrap underneath so I can get this out of my way without cutting my thread. That way I know there's a wrap underneath, and we'll trim that out. And now let's just clean this up just a little bit. And as we clean it up, we're working our way backwards towards the bend, and I'm pinching those marabou fibers to be on the top of the shank, and we'll end it right there. That's a really pretty tail. Man, I'm glad I'm filming this because that turned out phenomenal. Now, the next step is we're going to add this crystal flash. And if you've never, I already opened this pack, but I just put a little slit here in the back. I keep it in the plastic, and I'll just pull out a fiber. You could also pull out 2 fibers if you want, but 1 fiber will suffice. And I just fold it in half, and then I'll go ahead and just tie that in on my side. And we'll want to make sure that that crystal flash is going to be roughly the same length as our marabou fiber tails. And I'll do 2-3 wraps, securing that down, folding this up and over, doing a few more wraps, and making sure that it's aligned on the sides of this fly, and then just clean that up, and we'll go ahead and snip that so that that isn't connected, and then I'll make sure the other side is even as well, and I'll just snip it, trying not to cut our marabou. And there we go, we got our tail pretty much done. So the next step is to do this body, and I'm going to create a dub loop doing for this. You could also dub it onto your thread using like the noodle technique, but I'm going to just advance my thread right up there behind the tungsten bead. I've got my dubbing loop right here, and we're going to use the loon tool here for this dubbing loop, and I'm just going to set it in there. Now, to make this really durable, we're going to first create our dubbing loop, and then we'll add some super glue after, before we spread this up through the body. And that creates a couple different things. So first I'm going to align these fibers, kind of stacking them on top of each other, as you can see, so it kind of spreads them out. And I'm not putting it right on top of each other, I stacked it so that it's spread out in my hand. I'll put it in the dub loop, and then I just create tension by holding that in my left hand with a little bit of force, and then I spread it out using both fingers so that it's as even as possible throughout that dubbing loop. And then I'll just drape it over my finger here, give it a little spin. You can't really see the spinning action, but all I did was twist that dubbing loop tool, and then as the twisting goes up and over my finger, it twirls the dubbing loop and the material, and creating this awesome little mini brush we just did. And this is super, super buggy, super, super effective. I'm using this little brush here to work out any fibers that could be trapped in that loop, and to create it more evenly. So if you have like a bulky spot, just brush it a little bit more with that tool, and then I give it a little spin after that just to make sure it's bulletproof. And then we're going to add the super glue here, and I'm applying a generous amount. Now this is going to hold the marabou encased around the thread, encased around the embroidery pin to the shank of the hook, and that's what I think makes this super durable. So don't forget to add a little bit of super glue there at that step, and then we're going to just take this and palmer it around the body of the fly, kind of moving it at an angle. They don't have to necessarily be touching wraps, but that really, really depends on how dense you did your dubbing loop with the dubbing in it. So if you have a super, super dense loop and you didn't spread it out as nice, you may only need 2-3 wraps. I like to spread it out more to create a little bit more of an even body. It also allows the material to be, I think, trapped a little bit better, a little bit more durable to keep them in. And then we'll go ahead and do some wraps in front and wraps behind on this dubbing loop to close it off. So I did that twice, went behind and in front again. And then we'll go ahead and trim that out, discarding it. We don't really need to save that. And then I'll go ahead and do a couple more wraps to secure that. And we need to have a whip finish tool ready. I'm trying to find it over here on the right side of my desk. Excuse me. So we're going to do 2-3 wraps to clean that up, and then I'm going to grab my Sharpie here, and I'll just brush that up and down, giving it a nice red hot spot. I've also had really good luck with orange as well with this olive. I think it really helps to have this hot spot. Not necessary. You could switch threads, but I just use a Sharpie and white thread, and it works for me, and so it's really quick and easy. So we'll go ahead and do this 3-turn whip finish and trim out this thread. We're going to add a little bit of UV resin over that hot spot just to seal the deal and make it super, super durable. So I'll just put a little glob here on the upside here. And by doing this in combination with the super glue, I've had guys say that they had issues with the bead bending back using the embroidery pin. I've never had that, but I know it could happen because an embroidery pin isn't super durable, and if you got that stuck on a rock, it could create an issue. But the way I do this, I haven't had issues. I've snagged rocks and had a fun time. And the last step is we want to brush out this body, making it nice and flowy. And so just using that tool, I'm just working my way up and down. And I really like this tool because it fits in between the hook gap. So I'm not really running into that hook point very much. And we're just brushing it out and kind of shaping it so it goes backwards, and see what it looks like when it's wet. So that right there is a balanced leech. All these materials come in a bunch of different colors. I've caught You know, my go-to colors are probably olive, browns, little rusty oranges, blacks, hints of purple, blue, switching out beads. In the spring, I have really good luck with hot beads, you know, like fluorescent orange and yellows. But let's go ahead and see how this looks. I just got a spare piece of wire here, and we're going to see how it looks air balanced and then water balanced. So I'm just going to kind of create a little loop here so that it's not my knot that's keeping it in place, so we can see how well we did. The key is when it's air balanced, you want to sit slightly with the hook bend down at an angle. And this is kind of binding on my wire, which is kind of weird, but there you go. That's about, what, a 30-degree angle downwards. And so let's go ahead and move our vise. I got a glass of water here. You'll notice right away how that rabbit fiber is going to trap air in it as I dunk this down. So let's go ahead and make sure that is nice and loose on there. We got it emerged, and we're going to go down. You can see that air bubbles are getting trapped in the tail. That's completely natural. So I'm just going to dip it and dunk it a bunch of times. Let's see how this is reacting right now. So it's pretty close to being a little bit wet. I'm kind of snagging on the glass here, but you can see as you jig it up and down, it's going to be super, super lifelike, super, super minnow based, leech based. You know, the combinations are endless. So tie some up, fish them, hope they catch some fish for you.